And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Thursday, March 24th. And I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. And today we're going to go to Shoshone Bannock correspondent Mark Trahant from Fort Hall, Idaho. And we're going to talk to him about legislative world events and how it impacts the Indian community, what we're looking forward to in the next year with the GOP in power in various parts of the country, and other odds and ends from Indian country. Mark Trahant, what are we going to talk about today?
We could talk about my column. I'm writing about how we have this real divide where we need young people to pay the bills for old people. And the young people are largely brown, Native American, Asian, African American, Latino, and the older people are largely white. And if we can't figure out what's in it for the young people to pay the bills, we got a big problem coming up.
Indeed, which is part of the problem having to do with Social Security, Medicaid, and some of those entitlements.
Right.
And part of the reason we're supposedly running out of money, an aging population and other dynamics that are causing a lot of money withdrawals on the projections. People are living longer and everything else. And a country that's what do they call it? The colorization of the United States or North America.
Right. And the point is we got to start investing in the young people. And this whole talk about we're broke is missing that point, that if we don't make it so young people can contribute, how are they going to pay these bills? It's impossible. The math doesn't add up.
Well, demographics are going to be important because lots of people are looking at them now. Having voted their frustrations last November, there seems to be a lot of people who are a little bit concerned about where the Tea Party Republican GOP is taking the country. We've here in Wisconsin, and you noted that we've had a few protests in the last month and a half and a little bit of an uprising. People who voted their frustrations and voted on the Republican ticket are now apologizing publicly in some cases for having done that. They didn't know that this is what they were going to get.
Right. And I think it's a really good indicator because so many of these problems are they're complicated, and there aren't easy solution you can say, do this and we're done with it. These are complicated, long-term problems we got to fix.
And yet, isn't that what the sell? Slash taxes over here, we solve the problem. Repeal arbitration and negotiation process for certain segments of society. We've got it all solved. H&R, what is it? HR 1136 off the top of my head, a bill introduced by 4 or 5 congressmen, Texas, Ohio, Indiana, says that if someone in your family is receiving food stamps, and there's another individual in that household that goes on strike, the whole family loses their food stamps.
Right.
That's going to solve all the problems, isn't it?
It's also going to be real popular in farm states because food stamps is as much about selling agricultural products as it is feeding people.
Indeed. What are the demographics on these kinds of issues? What do you see those demographics as?
Well, it really, I mean, the farm area is a big part of it because so much of, there was a piece today or last night on Fox where John Stossel complained about American Indians getting so much money over the years. And not only is it faulty history, but it misses the point that there are these really systemic groups in America that have been subsidized forever. And who do you look at to then figure out, does that work in a 21st century context? Corn, high-density corn fructose is a good example of that. It's not good for our population. It's not good for our people. And any subsidies of it just make no sense.
Dairy farmers in Wisconsin might be another one.
A lot of high-fat industries, exactly.
But people make the correlation that Indian country has been subsidized all these years, and yet at every turn that they attempt to exert their rights, not at every turn, let's say casinos got through, cigarettes got through, But when it has to do with utilizing our assets, it seems we've been prevented from doing that. Let's to take for example the Koch brothers, which is a big issue in Wisconsin for having funded Governor Walker, and the Tea
Right.
Party, Prosperity for America, was investigated in 1989 through 1992 after they acquired oil fields in Oklahoma and underpaid royalties to American Indians.
Right. Huge problems with that, and long history of that. And not only that, that whole subsidy argument misses I think, a key point in that never in the history of the United States have these programs ever been fully funded. And you look at the chronic poverty and such, and some of that is because it was never funded. Indian Health Service is a great example of that. If it was at parity with the rest of healthcare spending in this country, even rural healthcare spending, it would be a very different story.
Is there all these budget cuts that we're facing? I mean, it seems to me that fundamentally the question is fairness, because on the opposite end of that, we ask the question: are people who are billionaires in this country paying their fair share of having accumulated that wealth? I don't want to blame them for being rich, but for example, John Menard in Wisconsin is a billionaire, $5.8 billion, the richest person in the state of Wisconsin, and yet people are saying that we can't tax those people anymore because they're the ones that create the jobs. I'm trying to figure out this paradigm in which all the people get poorer and poorer, and a handful of people get richer and richer in this country.
And it's been going that way. The data says it's been going that way for the last 40 years. I mean, the middle class has been wiped out in this country, and it's really not rich people's fault. It's a combination of the changing global economics. It's a bunch of other factors. But nonetheless, people are poor, and they don't have the resources they did. It's one of the reasons why the fight in Wisconsin is so important. Unions are one of the last barriers to prevent complete destruction of the middle class.
Well, I think that's the framing of the fight. The issue is a fight for the rights of workers and middle class people. That's how some people are framing it now. They says in a look at history shows that whenever there was a fight for rights, there's never been a loss. That this
Right.
battle is going to be won in the long run because it's the right thing. It protects the large middle class for rights that aren't written in the Constitution any more than human rights are written
Right.
into the Constitution. But they're rights to a safe workplace, a 40-hour work week, the right to have a living wage.
Right. And you look at the global competitors for these businesses or governments, and the countries that do well are often the ones with high-cost labor because it's a symbiotic relationship. People perform. It's where you look at the low-cost countries, and it's short-term. It is not in anybody's interest over the long haul.
Mark, is this a situation where outside forces are causing people internally to fight against each other? We're pointing fingers over at the Republicans and the Tea Parties. They're pointing fingers down to these people who are spending state and government money and taxpayers' money. Are we fighting each other over something that's basically out of our control or needs to be looked at from a different way?
I think in some ways that's true. I really do. We don't. That's one of the reasons I wanted to start writing about demographics. Is these demographic forces are much bigger than the budget or ideology of Republicans and Democrats. It's a changing world, and you look at somebody born today, even in Indian country, has a really good shot at living to 100, whereas 30 years ago that wasn't possible. And that fundamental changes everything, just the age.
Just the age. What other demographics do you see that's changing the country? Is it the explosion of Hispanic-based populations? The American Indians, of course, are on the rise, but we're married into a whole bunch of... Is it racial demographics? Is it demographics between haves and have-nots? What is the big influence point there?
Oh, partly both. And you're right, American Indians and the Hispanics are the two fastest growing groups in the United States percentage-wise. And Part of that is as people got more and more wealthy, in particularly the white community, they stopped having kids. And that community now has a negative growth rate. And whereas you have these double-digit growth rates in these other communities, so it's changing the character of the country. New Mexico is really the great example of that. The New Mexico population of Native Americans is just skyrocketing. Latinos, it's skyrocketing. Still, older white people, it's getting larger because they're going there to retire. And it really shows the test of this new tension. If you're older, you're retired, you think, why do I want to pay for schools? And why do I want to pay for schools when they're not like me? And the young brown workforce thinks the same thing. They look at these older white retirees and say, why do I want to pay for that? That's not me. And that, I think, creates a crisis for what kind of country we want to be, and one we have to resolve if we're going to be in it together.
And Indian country has a role to play in all of this. We've been terminated before. Now bargaining rights in Wisconsin have been terminated. Are all people just beginning to feel like American Indians for a change?
Yeah, I worry that termination will rear its head again in this climate. It's perfectly suited for that. And it could be a way out for them to say we can't afford what we're paying on Indians. And Stossel's piece on Fox yesterday was a classic example of that.
In that piece, what did they say there? We're just we're giving them too much money?
Right. John Stossel of Fox News said that forget the Wall Street bankers, American Indians are the most subsidized group in America, which is a bunch of crap. I mean, it's just not, the data doesn't match that at all.
Right, but it's like I thought we owned the gold in the Black Hills that they dug out and put to Fort Knox at one point. You know, someone got rich digging it up and burying it back in the ground. Figure that out.
Or figure out the land. I mean, you could go the whole different ways. It's just factually incorrect. But it becomes part of the discourse, unfortunately.
What are we looking for in Washington, D.C.? See anything coming up there that Indian country needs to keep an eye out on?
The continuing resolution between now and early April, and to see what develops on that. And this will probably be the last one, and this will set the tone for the rest of the year.
We'll keep an eye on it, Mark. Thanks for joining with us today.
Okay, Paul.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. Thanks for joining with us today, and come back again soon.